need to get used to this being more than simply an accounting of the funds in the transaction, which was been, primarily the job of the HUD-1, certainly in 1974, and still pretty much in the 2010 version. This form actually, and when I was at the table doing closings, this form really incorporates the headlines of the first 5 documents I would have walked you through at the closing table, which would have been the HUD-1, the first payment letter, the note, the security instrument, and the final till. One of the reasons that we spent time introducing you to the loan estimate form today, even though the settlement agent should not be preparing the loan estimate form, is once you understand the flow of the loan estimate form, the closing disclosure form does follow that same form and function. So when we talk about things that the CFPB really understood that were important to us, we said the most important thing that borrowers want to know in advance of closing is their payment amount, their interest rate, and how much cash they need to close. And as Ben noted, they actually determined where things fall on the form by order of importance. So we were heard and consumers were heard. On page 1, you see other things, loan amount, but primarily, as we said, interest rate, monthly payment, and how much cash is needed to close. So again, this is mirroring page 1 of the loan estimate. Pretty easy to understand this, but again, this form is much more of a loan, key loan feature disclosure than just debits and credits having to do with the accounting of the dollars. On page 2 is where we'll start to see those itemizations. Now, at first glance, this page does not look that much different than page 2 of the HUD-1 that we're used to working with. But as soon as you look at it a little more closely, you'll notice some things. For example, if we start down the left-hand side, you will notice the new sections, Section A and B, C, D. As Ben mentioned, these mirror the groupings of fees pretty closely. I think they did a really good job here. Things will move around from form to form and perhaps within the deal itself based on potentially which group of variances or tolerances the fees fall within. So for example, if the lender presumed that a borrower was not going to shop for a provider and then the borrower decided to elect their own provider, a fee might change sections. So we have some new movement on this form that we may not have had before. I'll come back to the things on the left in a minute, but let's go across the page looking at the right. You'll notice now that we have 5 columns. So under borrower paid, we have 2 columns, at closing and before closing. Under seller paid, we have at closing and before closing, and that sort of 5th money column out on the far right is paid by others. So what you'll notice inside, what we call inside the column in our world, inside the description line, what you will not see is any POC references. Those are gone, and something will either now be paid at or before closing by one of the principals, or it'll be paid by others. All right, so that's kind of a significant change. You also see, again, in the sections an itemization of each fee, but also the concept of the roll-up or the total of the grouping did survive. So in the line across from A, if you follow that blue line across, you will see the total borrower paid charges in the section. So we have the best of both worlds. We have the full itemization at the line-by-line level, and we have a roll-up total of those items for the section. So a little bit different, but certainly workable, easy math. As was referenced in the C section, so you will see there some services that are related to our industry. These, again, are the services that were required by the lender in conjunction with the loan, and the borrower, in this case, shopped for the service provider. So some of the title insurance fees would be listed there. But also in Section H, some of our fees, primarily in this example, the owner's title insurance optional premium, which is listed differently. It's listed in H because it is not required for the lender in conjunction with the loan. The major thing that will leap out at you about this form is our sort of, I won't say time-honored, but the groupings of fees that we are accustomed to and have been accustomed to since 1974 are gone. So, for example, real estate commissions in the 700s, gone. The title fees and related fees in the 1100s, gone. Everyone across multiple industries will need to sort of retrain that. So as you're engaging your customers, both lenders and realtors along the way, some of those very basic things that we sort of have so deeply ingrained that we don't even think about anymore, whether we're referencing the HUD-1 or we're checking the commission in the 700 section, will need to change. So we have some time to get used to that. We will get used to that. There is nothing unworkable in here. It's simply going to be a matter of retraining our brain and retooling our systems to be able to do this. But there's no magic on this page, nothing that is mathematically or programmatically impossible. A couple of challenges, yes. Dan alluded to one with how the title insurance is to be calculated and disclosed. That's one of the benefits of a long implementation period is we have time to work with CFPB to get those mechanical items ironed out, and we will. So that is kind of the highlights of page 2. We can jump to page 3. Page 3, if you look at the top third, is simply sort of a restatement that you saw in the loan estimate of how did we arrive at these cash to close amounts. Again, mathematical. One potential challenge in the far right column, Ben mentioned this when he talked about the loan estimate. If the answer to some of these questions, did something change? We have a little bit of a caution flag to throw here in hoping and kind of trying to sequester this section into not becoming an essay section. I finally call, call it the potential for an essay type answer. I think CFPB gave us some good guardrails to stay within here by essentially, instead of telling the whole story here, let's reference to where those things are itemized out. But again, a caution here that we won't want that section to grow into a 7 years ago storytelling of how the loan terms progressed and changed over time. The bottom 2/3 look very much like page 1 today. So it is your aggregation of debits and credits for the entire transaction, not just the loan. Again, no magic here. Basic debits and credits like we are used to working with today. Any tolerance cures or outside variation cures also are allowed for here, as long as including other adjustments as well. So nothing mythical on this page. And we'll jump to actually I'm going to kind of cover the next 2 pages pretty quickly in saying these are the headlines from the other key loan package items that we talked about. So is the note assumable? What are the terms of the grace period for late payment? Is there a negative AM? Can you make partial payments? A little bit of information on servicing of the account and escrow account information. Page 5 here looks very much like what you saw in the loan estimate, including the APR and the tip, which is the flip side of APR. And at the bottom, 2 things I do want to point out. First of all, sort of a handy, I'm going to call it Rolodex of the main service providers in the transaction: lender, mortgage broker, 2 realtors, and a settlement agent. And then I definitely want to take a moment to talk about the signature block on this document. If you can see it on your screen, in case you can't, I just want to read it for you. It says, by signing, you are only confirming that you have received this form. You do not have to accept this loan because you have signed or received this form. Let's think about why that is a minute. This is a disclosure that is going to the borrower 3 days in advance of consummation. Again, not a showstopper here. People tend to get a little high in blood pressure when they first see this, but remember when the 2010 HUD-1 came out, we also got a little exercise that it had no signature block requirement on it, and how was that supposed to work? And the market actually practically came in and said, yeah, we're going to need borrower and seller acknowledgement on this, and so the market worked that out. Notice that it is an applicant and co-applicant signature if the borrower acknowledges receipt of the form or when they acknowledge receipt of the form. So if you are a dispersing agent, right now with this language, I do not think that you would view this as authorization to disperse the funds according to the itemization of funds in the transaction. And so I think that you will have a separate debit credit worksheet with that sort of acknowledgement from both the buyer and the seller that you would rely upon as authorization to disperse the funds. That is not legal advice. That is just a practical consideration for you to file away and keep in mind for as we move through the implementation cycle. You may be asking about the seller, and on that form, the seller was not really represented in a way that you might think appropriate. So the good news is the Bureau did give us a form that can be used for the seller information, and I'm going to hand that over to Cynthia to walk you briefly through that.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so there is a form that you can give to the seller, and I think it'll be up to the settlement agent and the transaction, individual transaction, as to whether or not you also give the closing disclosure to the seller, or maybe certain pages of the closing disclosure to the seller. But if you choose not to, and if you choose to use this seller form, you'll see page 1 of that here on this slide. Looks sort of like an abbreviated version of the first and third page of the closing disclosure, with that general information up at the top, and then the seller's transaction summary, very much like our current page 1 of our HUD, on the left-hand side, and then that contact information, just vertically instead of horizontally, that's on the last page of the closing disclosure on the right-hand side of this page. Again, just to be provided to the seller. Next slide, please, for the second, so you can see the second page. Again, abbreviated version of the second page of the closing disclosure. I think that's right, second page. I think it's the second page of the closing disclosure with just the seller's column showing at closing and before closing. The thing to keep in mind, though, about this is that the rule does say that you don't have to use this form, but if you do choose to use this form, that you are supposed to send a copy of this form to the creditor. If you choose to use the seller form, you are supposed to send a copy to the creditor.